This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Bacchanalia by Aquamyosotis, composed by Burning Aurora, Caliana, and Flowerhawk. The grove was alive long before the revelers arrived. Ivy curled across the ancient stone like veins beneath the skin of the world, glossy leaves twisting towards torches that hissed in their brackets. Underfoot, flowers bloomed in the cracks of the earth, their heads heavy with nectar, bowing under the weight of their own sweetness which filled the air, which shimmered, thick with promise. This was no place for restraint. It was a place for surrender, for hunger, a place to come and worship at the feet of what you believed. Above, the sky was black silk stretched taut, stitched with a scatter of stars. Where the moon hung low and swollen, pale as bone, its light pooling silver across the leaves, turning every vine into a serpent tempting the eye, whispering of forbidden fruit. And then, somewhere in the distance, the drums began to beat. The mortals were coming. They slipped between the trees in ones and twos with a languid grace, their heads full of dreams and their laughter hushed. Masks obscured their faces, gilded bronze, ebony wood, feathers dyed indigo and green. Laurel crowns tilted across their brows, ivy circlets wound tight into tangled hair. Their garments, loose and silken, caught the torchlight, glowing with a rippling of crimson and gold. They walked with quiet footfalls as the grove stirred to greet them. Vines stretched down from the treetops like idle fingers, brushing shoulders and arms in welcome, and blossoms opened, spilling petals across the scorched ground as the air thickened with their fragrant musk, mixing with already crushed herbs and the first sharp tang of freshly uncorked wine. As more of them gathered, the sound of drums grew louder, beating steadily until joined by the metallic clash of cymbals. The music seemed to have no beginning or end, just an insistent rhythm no mortal could hum. Instead, they danced, swaying before they meant to, hips shifting, heads angling up to the sky. Their laughter rose, no longer quiet but bright and unrestrained, and it carried upwards until the stars themselves seemed to tremble. The wine flowed freely, clay goblets passed between hands, sloshing dark liquid that gleamed like garnets. It spilled on wrists, on throats, on mouths that met eagerly, droplets splashing like fistfuls of rubies. The torches flared higher with every mouthful, shadows twisting on the bark of the trees. Nothing was still. The grove had become a living thing, a creature of wine and fire, of sweat and song, and, as the night deepened, it demanded more. At the heart of the revel stood Sirius. He arrived like a storm breaking, bursting into the clearing with laughter on his tongue and fire at his back. Crowned in starlight, he shone with a light not wholly mortal, bending towards the gleam of sweat across his collarbones and gilding his sharp grin. His skin was marked with enchantments, faint shimmering sigils that pulsed when he moved, catching and vanishing like lightning across a dark sea. Where he walked, frenzy followed. Maenads shrieked his name, reaching for him with ivy-stained hands. Satyrs clattered their hooves against the stone to mark his steps, and the mortals pressed close, their masks slipping as their lips parted in hope that he might see them. And see them he did. He fed them wine, the cup in his hand overflowing, spilling over his fingers to streak his wrists, yet never a drop would fall. He poured it freely into eager mouths, drank deep himself and laughed, the sound like music. He thrived on it, Sirius, as if Dionysus, born of excess and made radiant by indulgence. He was the wine, the fire, the frenzy, and the freedom. His joy was wild enough to border on cruelty, and his beauty was sharp enough to wound. All he had to do was ask, and the world would answer to him. And where Sirius was, watching him on the shadowed edge, just beyond the torchlight, would always be Remus. He had not crowned himself in ivy, nor hidden his face behind feathers and gold. He wore only plain clothes, the soft weight of wool and muted tones of the earth. His stillness was striking. His eyes betrayed him. They followed Sirius relentlessly, through the throng, tracking every movement, every tilt of his head, the long lines of his neck thrown back in mirth. And although Remus's body stayed still, his pulse betrayed him. Caught in the rhythm and beating in time with the drums, he told himself he would resist. Because yes, there was power in him, cool and ordered, the sharp clarity of Apollo, yet beneath lay a wolf, pacing, restless, straining against its chains. It was the wolf that hungered, and it was the wolf that saw Sirius's mouth glistening with wine and wanted. Sirius was everything Remus denied himself. Chaos, brilliance, indulgence, without shame. So Remus stood unmoving as he always did, carved from restraint and convincing himself that distance was safety. Yet with every burst of Sirius's laughter, every flare of the torchlight against his radiant skin, that conviction slowly cracked, and tonight the crack was almost splintered. Dionysus called to Apollo, and Remus, no matter how still he stood, was already moving towards his surrender, because as inevitably in the day turned to night, Sirius saw him and he did not hesitate. Even through the frenzy, through the grasping hands, the hooves striking sparks on stone, the wails of pleasure that rattled the night, Sirius's gaze cut through like a blade straight to where Remus stood, obscured by the shadows. He moved with lethal certainty, tearing himself free of worshippers who clung to him like drowning men, and the grove pulled back its vines to let him through. He approached Remus, holding a goblet that glowed like molten gold, as if starlight had dissolved into the liquid. Each step set it trembling, sending veins of light across the surface, reflecting the enchantments on Sirius's skin that still glittered faintly. He did not hurry, but he did not falter either. He stopped before Remus, and it was close enough that the wine's scent, rich and spiced, reached Remus before his words did.
Here again.
Sirius tipped the cup lazily, letting the surface ripple like liquid flame.
Why do you linger here, Remus?
He asked, his voice curling like smoke against Remus's skin.
When the night begs for you to join it.
Remus did not answer. He did not move, but his fingers flexed at his sides, and his eyes flicked from Sirius's mouth to the wine and back again. Sirius saw the flicker, and his grin sharpened.
Gods, you're thirsty,
he murmured, stepping closer so Remus could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the salt slick of his skin.
You wear your restraint like you wear your armor.
He bared his teeth.
But I wonder.
He twisted the cup, let a line of blood-red trail down his wrist across the pale edge of his hand. He caught Remus's gaze and with deliberate slowness licked the wine away.
I wonder how long before you choke on it.
Remus swallowed. His silence was its own kind of defiance, but they both knew that it was futile. Sirius thrived on defiance.
Do you think order will save you here?
Sirius asked, his voice rising to carry above the beat of the drums.
We are not in a temple of reason. There is no hall of law here. But we do worship this.
He gestured behind him, to the writhing tangle of bodies, illuminated by the flames leaping high.
This is truth.
He pressed the goblet lightly against Remus's chest, not hard but insistent, the glow bleeding through the fabric of his tunic, searing hot like a brand.
One taste.
Sirius promised.
One taste and you'll see.
He leaned in, his next words ghosting over the shell of Remus's ear.
Come now, my love. You can't stand in the darkness forever. I can see it. You were made for fire.
The goblet gleamed between them, but Remus did not reach for it, his eyes lifting to Sirius instead.
I've told you.
His voice was hoarse.
This isn't wise.
Even he knew the words rang hollow, stripped of conviction after all this time. Sirius laughed, low and warm, a sound that stirred the air like thunder before rain.
Wise.
He repeated, rolling his head back, throat catching silver light.
You think the stars keep their counsel, that the moon hangs on wisdom? No, they burn because they must, as you will.
He lifted the cup, the rim brushing against Remus's lower lip, just a whisper, enough to leave a wet gleam behind. His tongue darted out instinctively, catching the taste before he could stop himself. Spiced sweetness, as thick as honey, and his throat worked in a swallow he hadn't meant to make, a soft sound escaping him. Sirius caught it, and his eyes flared triumphant.
There it is. You stand there carved in stone, watching, measuring. But I see you.
He dragged his tongue up over Remus's cheek, his breath sweet with wine.
Eventually even statues crack and crumble.
And what would you have me be then?
Remus questioned him, the taste still heavy on his tongue.
Another body writhing in the dirt. Another voice lost to the drums.
Sirius's grin flickered into something familiar.
Yes or no, Remus, I would have you burn.
He lifted the cup again until its edge rested against Remus's mouth. The liquid quivered. It would only take a swipe of his tongue to collect a drop into his mouth. Around them the revel shrieked and swayed. Sirius seemed to draw it inward, as if all in the grove, and the grove itself, bent towards his will. The music quickened, pulsing in Remus's ribs. The wolf prowled closer beneath his skin, and he closed his hands into fists to stop them from reaching.
You ask for surrender?
Remus questioned, forcing the words between clenched teeth.
I ask for truth.
Sirius dipped a finger into the cup, smearing wine across his own mouth.
You hide your hunger, Remus. Do you think I cannot smell it on you?
He moved closer still, close enough that the heat of him smothered the cool night air, close enough that the wolf inside Remus strained forward.
Taste it.
Sirius whispered, catching Remus's hand and unfurling his fingers, guiding them up to wrap around the stem of the cup.
One sip, and I promise, you will remember that you were never meant for chains.
Remus drew in a slow breath, bringing the goblet to his mouth, but with a sharp exhale, he turned his face aside, the cup just missing his lips.
This isn't wise.
He said again, but softer this time, his voice frayed. He was unraveling. Sirius's smile curved like a blade catching the firelight.
Good.
He purred, pressing his lips to Remus's cool fingers.
Wisdom tastes sour. Drink.
Remus yielded. The wine flowed over his tongue thick and red, clinging like velvet and sweet as rot. It burned as he swallowed, and for a moment he thought it would scald him, but instead it bloomed, unfurling warmth, the heat seeping into every sinew of his body until it settled and the air shifted. Vines slithered down from the branches to coil against his shoulders, brushing the line of his neck, winding lazy like lovers' hands. Gardenia and neroli burst open around him, spilling their perfume so thickly it clogged his lungs, their petals falling in showers of white and gold, catching in his lashes and sticking to the sweat beginning to purl at his skin. The torches flared higher, flames licking into wild, strange shapes that writhed like living things, casting shadows that snarled across the stone. The beat of the drums rose until Remus could feel them under his skin, sinking with his pulse and forcing it faster and harder until his whole body thrummed with it. The wolf inside him lunged forward, claws raking but not in fury, with exaltation. It prowled behind his ribs, delighting in the madness, his every nerve alight. Remus could feel his senses sharpen, Sirius's scent striking like iron and smoke and wine, so potent that Remus could taste it. The world pressed closer, every color more vivid than it had ever been. He gasped, a sound torn from somewhere deep, and he thrust the goblet back at Sirius.
Enough.
His voice sounded shredded, cracked low.
It's too much.
Sirius caught his wrist before the goblet could fall, his laughter spilling bright. His grip closed around Remus's skin, light but unyielding, trapping the cup between them.
Too much.
Sirius said, his eyes fever bright.
No, my God, this is just enough.
His thumb pressed against the frantic pulse beneath Remus's skin, the proof he was searching for, and then entwined their hands. The cup trembled between them, and the wine seemed to glow hotter, bleeding scarlet where it spilled down, streaking Remus's arm, his clothes. Sirius lifted their joined hands, forcing the goblet back towards his lips as the vines on Remus's shoulder coiled around them, binding them together. The petals still fell, sticking wet at the corner of his mouth, sticky with nectar that smeared his skin like oil. The ground itself seemed to shake, as if eager for him to fall to his knees, and all the while the music rose into a frenzy until it felt like the whole world was chanting with Sirius, "Drink, drink, drink." Remus tried to pull free, but Sirius's grip did not loosen.
You would run from this.
Sirius whispered, leaning close enough for his breath to ghost over Remus's cheek.
Tell me, Remus, is it fear that holds you back, or is it desire?
Remus's head lolled, his eyes closing.
This isn't wise.
He said once more, though even as he said it, nectar dripped from a flower at his temple and slid slowly down his throat, like another mouth feeding him. Sirius followed its path with his tongue, a hot brand on Remus's skin.
And I've told you before, wisdom has no place here. Only truth, only fire. And I, my love, I would like to see you blaze.
Remus drained the goblet, and then it was gone, stolen back into the crowd by quick hands, but Sirius did not give Remus time to mourn its loss. His hand still in Remus's own, tugging him forward into the swell of bodies where the crowd closed over them like a tide, swallowing them whole. Figures pressed close, slick with sweat and wine, twisting in shapes that looked more like convulsions than dance. Maenads shrieked their ecstasy, hair whipping, teeth flashing as they spun, their bare feet slamming in the dirt. Satyrs locked horns and shoved each other laughing, wine spilling from their cups as they tangled with whoever fell into reach. The air was hot with incense and musk, thick enough that Remus coughed, his throat raw with it. He tried to resist at first, his shoulders braced, feet digging against the soil, but Sirius only chuckled and urged him forward, smiling at him as if the struggle itself was the sweetest part. With a twist of his arm, Sirius set them turning, spinning him into the current and guiding him with a palm at his chest and a grip at his hip.
Dance.
He commanded, and Remus knew the word was less suggestion than incantation. So he obeyed, moving as blurred forms swayed, grinding together, masks flashing animal grins, breasts bared and mouths stained. A flute trilled sharp and shrill above the drumbeat, and the music seemed to twist around them, pulling at Remus's spine. His feet shifted, his hands shook with the rhythm, and Sirius circled him like a flame around kindling, every burst of his laughter sparking above the canopy, igniting pinpricks of starlight that seemed to rain sparks. And higher still, the stars rippled, shattering into fragments, constellations unraveling and reforming into things no mortal had ever named. Those same stars caught in his lashes as Remus tipped his head back, sweat streaking down his temples, a palm dragged across his chest, fingers painting ash across his jaw, golden dust ground into his skin until he gleamed like an idol. Faces closed in and dissolved before he could tell if they were human, beast, or something in between. A nymph brushed past him, coating his lips in wine and then kissing it away. His breath caught, startled, but Sirius's hand had already tightened at his waist, dragging Remus's attention back to him as he hissed at her, watching as she dissolved into dust.
Mine.
Sirius said, mouth curved against Remus's jaw, words nearly lost in the roar of the crowd.
Look at you, Remus. Even stone moves when the drum calls. Even wolves can dance, and they can want to.
Remus shuddered, grasping for Sirius, needing to feel him. His hands dragged over Sirius's body, greedy for it. The wolf inside him was no longer straining at the cage. It was free, howling in delight at the feel of Sirius against him. Around them the crowd pressed in, heat coming from every side, but Sirius never let him go. His hands mapped every line of Remus's body, grinding against him, demanding and coaxing until Remus could not tell if he stood on earth or had already been flung into the heavens. Something honey-sweet spread over his lips, but he didn't remember drinking. Sirius's tongue licked them clean anyway, hot and merciless, and Remus's opened willingly with a gasp that became a howl, torn out of him without consent. Sirius pressed their foreheads together, his eyes blazing and his breath ragged.
You're still here.
He murmured, soft yet hungry.
Only now you remember.
And he wrapped a hand around Remus's throat. Remus's breath rasped, but Sirius did not release him. As around them, the crowd reeled, screaming for him, and the torches flared, but all he could see were Sirius's eyes.
You feel it, don't you?
Sirius asked him.
They will want you. They are only waiting for me to say it. Every cry is for you.
Remus shook his head, though the denial faltered. His feet still beat the earth in time, unable to stop.
You're wrong. They don't even know me.
Sirius brushed his mouth against Remus's temple, then the hinge of his jaw, but never quite granting the kiss.
They know what I tell them. They will want you, but I will tell them you are mine.
His fingers slid higher, tangling in the damp hair at Remus's nape, wrenching his head back just enough to bare his throat and let him see.
Look at them. They will want for us.
Remus dared a glance. Eyes gleamed in every mask, every painted face turned towards them, not just worshipping Sirius, but watching him too. Sirius's fingers tightened further, urging his face back.
See, already they would worship you.
His hand stayed a beat longer, and then slowly he withdrew. Not away but outward he unfurled like flame, stepping into its own blaze, and he pulled Remus with him, step by deliberate step, into the open center of the grove. The change was immediate. The crowd stilled, motion rippling into stillness like water settling into glass. The dancers froze mid-turn, arms slack and heads tilting towards Sirius. Even the music faltered for a breath before the drums answered first, rolling deeper, heavier, 1,000 feet stamping the dirt in unison. Even the trees swayed, groaning as though their roots strained to bow, and all eyes were fixed on Sirius. He was right, Remus realized. They adored him. The way some gazes trembled while others burned, desperate and hungry. They did not look at him as though he was merely a man, but at something that was radiant, untouchable. He was the god they had conjured into flesh, and if he had commanded them to tear out their hearts for him, they would have. He only had to ask and they would obey. There was no question of it. But Sirius did not ask of them. Instead, he raised his arms and they followed, a forest of hands clawing at the air. He laughed and the sound carried and echoed, multiplying over and over until it seemed not one voice but a chorus breaking the sky. And in the same gesture, he presented Remus, drew him forward until the circle's focus turned, until the adoration that set Sirius alight bent towards him too. Whispers threaded through the crowd, half gasps, half chants, and for a horrible moment Remus thought he might sink under it, the weight of so many gazes upon him. But Sirius's hand was firm at his back, steadying him, binding him to the moment and showing him to the world. Sirius tore a length of ivy down from the trees, snapping it free. The vines writhed in his hands as he twisted them into a crown, the green leaves curling alive in his grip, their tips sparking with tiny flames that hissed and licked at Sirius's wrists, though he did not flinch. He turned to Remus and a hush fell upon the grove. The crowd bent forward, holding their breath. Sirius stepped closer, a hand lifting to Remus's hair, combing it back, stroking against his scalp. His touch reached his temple, tracing the curve of his ear, and then settled firm at the nape of his neck.
Ivy for the god.
Sirius called, lifting the crown high, his voice low and rich, carrying as if the night itself strained to hear him.
Flame for the divine.
He set the crown on Remus's head, and the ivy cinched tight, and for an instant it seared. Real pain, sharp and bright before it melted into a heat that felt like blood quickening, like power seeping through every vein. He could not help it. He cried out, his arms outstretched, and the revel around him broke like a storm. Some threw themselves to the ground in bowing prostration, others tore away their masks and pressed their mouths to the dirt. The torches blazed high, fire leaping as if hungry for their new god. The chant began with one voice, swelling like thunder until the earth shook with it.
Gods among gods, gods among gods.
Remus staggered at the sound as hands stretched towards him. The noise rolled through him, shaking his ribs and vibrating his bones. Near him, a nymph clutched her heart and sobbed with joy, and a satyr flung down his lyre, horns tossing as he bellowed the words. And through it, Sirius's hand never left him, holding him steady and claiming him before all, smiling like a man who had created the god he worshipped. Their gazes locked, and for an instant it was only the two of them, the rest of the world blurring into smoke and fire. Then Sirius pulled him in and kissed him. It was not soft, it was ravenous, claiming a collision of mouths that tasted of ash and wine and eternity. Remus made a choked sound into it, but Sirius did not stop, and then the sound instead became a growl torn from somewhere deeper. The revelers shifted as one as they watched, no longer screeching, but humming low and reverent, a sound like prayer rising in the air. Some fell into each other's arms, kissing too with tears streaming down their faces. Others scratched at their own skin as though desperate to feel what the kiss carried. They formed a circle around them, letting the two gods take center stage, pillars of flames framing Sirius and Remus as if on an altar. And as for Remus, there was only Sirius. His taste, his heat, the hand fisted in his hair, the feel of his body pinning him in place. He tasted his entire life on Sirius's tongue, wild and sweet, and his body trembled under the weight of it. All traces of fear were gone, and instead he found himself basking in the adoration that poured through the grove, that poured through him. When their mouths finally parted, they stayed close, breath mingling, foreheads pressed together. Sirius's lips brushed the corner of his, a fleeting caress that felt like benediction. His smile was still triumphant, but also softer, as though he too had been transformed.
They see us.
He whispered, eyes burning like coals fanned high.
Now they cannot forget that we are one.
He lifted Remus's hand and pressed Remus's palm to his chest, and Remus pushed, watched as Sirius's back bowed. The forest floor responded before he could fall, catching him with roots that slithered up from underground, curling upwards and weaving together into a natural platform. Thick moss sprung up along its edges, white jasmine spreading where none had been moments before, the petals soft and warm under their feet. Sirius reached up for Remus, pulling him downwards. Remus shivered as Sirius's hand slid along the curve of his shoulders, slow over the swell of muscle.
They are watching.
Remus murmured, voice low as his hands worked to remove the knots of ivy in Sirius's hair.
They can watch, but that is all. Only I taste, only I claim.
Sirius hummed in response and then waved his hand. White light encircled them, bright and blinding, and then settled on the ground, still smoldering. The spectators looked on in a mix of awe and reverence, leaning towards them as though drawn by invisible threads, but they could not come closer.
There.
Sirius smiled as his thumb made to brush the creases of Remus's brow.
Now you will not have to fight.
His hand slid down across a taut abdomen, following the line of ribs.
This is ours. Let them watch. They are our witnesses. But it is you alone who will see me undone. They do not matter. Are you ready?
Remus's fingers dug into the moss beneath him, his wolf snarling in anticipation. He nodded, a growl caught in his throat.
Yes.
And he bent further, drawing Sirius into a kiss which turned harsh and greedy, their teeth grazing and their tongues tasting. Sirius moaned immediately, a low, desperate sound that vibrated through his throat, spilling into Remus's mouth. His nails dug into Remus's forearms, leaving red crescents in hot, firm flesh. He was trembling, offering himself utterly, and Remus felt that he would go mad with the knowledge. He pressed down further, teeth catching at the tender skin at Sirius's jaw, tasting him there before sinking his teeth in hard. Sirius arched violently, hips pressing up instinctively. Remus dragged his teeth free, leaving a ragged mark already slick with blood. He lapped at it, tongue curling over the wound, smearing it over Sirius's mouth when he kissed him again. Sirius kissed him back as if starving, licking the taste of his own blood from Remus's tongue, pulling hard at his hair as his nails tore shallow furrows down Remus's spine. The sting only spurred Remus harder, and he ground against him, cock pressed hard against Sirius's thigh, leaving a wet streak there. Their kiss broke into panting, mouths red and sticky, but Remus couldn't stop. He bit again, this time at Sirius's throat, breaking the skin. Sirius tipped his head back, his throat bared and breath stuttering, as though begging for his teeth. "Fuck!" Sirius rasped as Remus's hands dragged down Sirius's sides, palms greedy over slick, hot skin, catching at the ridges of ribs and the curve of his hips. He shoved Sirius's legs apart and knelt between them, tearing away the fabric that still clung to them both until there was nothing left but bare flesh. Sirius hissed when the cool air hit him, then moaned deep in his chest when Remus wrapped a fist around his cock and stroked once. Remus groaned as pre-cum smeared across his fingers, licking it from his hand and then lowering his head to lick it from Sirius directly, tongue hot over the leaking head. He sucked greedily, working his tongue under the head, hollowing his cheeks until Sirius cried out, fists clenching in Remus's hair, jerking him closer. Remus gagged and growled against him, spit slicking his chin as he pulled back only to sink down again, deeper. He let Sirius fuck his mouth until saliva dripped down his chin, spreading between Sirius's arse. He pulled back with a snarl, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, and then bit into the inside of Sirius's thigh, hard enough to bruise, laughing as Sirius cried out, sharp and hoarse. Sirius writhed, cock slapping wetly against his stomach, smearing wetness across his skin, and Remus groaned at the sight, watching it shine. His own cock strained painfully heavy between his thighs, dripping steadily.
"Please."
Sirius gasped, reaching for him, but Remus slapped his hand away. He spat into his hand, slicking himself up roughly, and lined himself up. Sirius was already open for him, needy, rocking up to meet him. One brutal thrust and he was inside, burying himself to the hilt. Sirius screamed, his head snapping back, body arching as his hips lifted to try and take Remus deeper. The stretch was raw, obscene, and Remus lifted a hand to feel where they were joined, grunting as he ground in deeper. The heat and the pressure made him dizzy. He pulled almost all the way out, looking at his cock now smeared pink, and then slammed forward again, hard enough to knock the breath from both their lungs. Sirius clutched at him, nails scoring his shoulders, his cock leaking untouched, his moans breaking into guttural cries as each snap of Remus's hips drove him higher. Their mouths met between thrusts, wet and messy. Remus sucked on Sirius's tongue as Sirius bit at Remus's lips until blood spilled between them, and Remus kissed him harder, tasting iron and heat. The rhythm built, brutal and relentless. Remus braced his hands on Sirius's thighs, forcing them wider and allowing Remus deeper. Every time Sirius's voice cracked, every time he writhed beneath him, Remus answered with his teeth, with bruises, with bites on his collarbones, down his chest, marking him, claiming him until Sirius was slick with his spit and sweat, shining and shaking under the starlight, his body taut as a bowstring, every sound torn raw from his throat. When Sirius came, it was violent, his whole body arching off the ground, hot streaks painting his chest, dripping down his sides. He shuddered violently, crying out, still clenching around Remus as though to drag him deeper inside, even as he collapsed back into their mossy bed. Remus did not stop. He fucked him through it and then drove harder, faster into the tight, spasming heat. Sirius's nails dug in again, tearing fresh trails down his arms, and Remus's orgasm was ripped out of him. He snarled, teeth sinking into Sirius's shoulder as he came hard, spilling inside him, grinding deep to make sure it stayed there. They stayed locked together, gasping, mouth finding each other again in a messy, half-open kiss that tasted of everything they had broken open between them. Their breathing was harsh, lungs burning, but neither pulled away. Remus stayed buried deep, trembling with the aftershocks, and Sirius's legs stayed wrapped tight around his waist as though he would never let go. When Remus broke the kiss, he realized the night had gone utterly silent. The crowd was still there, a ring of masked faces fallen into a rapt quiet. The silence stretched, heavy and sacred, and then, somewhere amongst the revelers, a voice broke it, a low, wordless chant. Others picked it up, and then the air was buzzing with it. Sirius smiled up at him.
For us,
He whispered, and Remus smiled too, pressing one last kiss to Sirius's swollen mouth and pulling him imperceptibly closer as he let his eyes fall shut, lulling them both into a deep sleep. The world could have burned around them, and still they would not have moved. The grove had collapsed into a dream of itself. Where before the air had shaken with drums and shrieks, now it held only the faint hum of cicadas and the sigh of branches heavy with the approaching dawn. The revelers lay where they had fallen, some curled like children, others with arms draped over strangers they'd never know the names of. A satyr slept with his cheek against a shattered cup, ivy tangled round his horns, and a nymph floated on a pool's surface, hair streaming like waterweed, her chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm of dreams. The torches were now guttered down to ash, and the air smelt of smoke and sweat. Still at the center, Sirius and Remus lay, the moss now pressed flat beneath their weight. They were laid on their sides, limbs tangled together, skin cool now, but bodies pressed so close it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Sirius's breath ghosted across Remus's chest, steady, and his fingers curled lightly in the hair at Remus's sternum. His lips were gently parted, still swollen, still stained faintly red. Remus stared upward through the branches, his body aching, each muscle heavy with exhaustion. Yet he had never felt so unburdened. He huffed a laugh, rousing Sirius, who laughed too, low and breathless, his chest shaking against Remus's. It was no longer the wild bark from the night before, but something smaller, more human now.
Stop laughing.
Remus smiled into the crown of black hair, damp with the morning dew.
You'll wake them.
can't help it.
Sirius said.
You look.
He lifted his head to stare at Remus, at his matted hair, and his jaw marked with bruises and bites. His grin turned wicked as he reached a hand to his neck, feeling the dried blood crusting on top of the bruises.
You look like you killed me and ate me alive.
Remus snorted. He knew he should feel embarrassed, but his body was too loose, too sated to summon the feeling.
I should feel ashamed.
He said, brushing his lips tenderly along Sirius's brow, eyes closing.
Why?
Sirius rolled fully on top of him. He traced a finger idly along the red lines that spun down Remus's arms.
Shame's for people who don't know what it's like to live properly.
Remus cracked an eye open, a reluctant smile tugging at his mouth.
I don't know how to live. You think you can teach me?
I already have.
Sirius said simply as he bent closer to press a soft kiss.
Look at you. Look at us.
So Remus did. At himself, yes, but also at Sirius, at the glint of his teeth, the sweat-matted hair, the teeth marks at his throat, at the sheer audacity of his joy. And for once, Remus allowed himself to believe him, that there was no shame here, no sin in what they had done, what they had given to one another. They lay in silence a little longer, letting the hush of the grove fold around them. Somewhere in the trees, a bird began to call, tentative at first, as if testing the edges of the dawn. Then the fireflies went out, and above them, the stars unraveled, paling into the first blush of morning. Finally, Sirius heaved himself off Remus with a groan, sitting to stretch his arms and legs. He offered a hand to Remus, who took it without a word. Their legs were shaky as they stood, bare feet crunching over crushed flowers, wet against the damp earth and surrounded by the faint sighs of the still dreaming crowd.
Come,
Sirius said, tugging Remus to him, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And perhaps it was, Remus thought to himself. They walked together through the wreckage of the revel, the ground littered with the debris of last night's debauchery, bottles and feathers, piles of ash. No one woke as they passed, a few only stirring faintly, but none spoke, and Sirius's hand was warm against Remus's palm. At the tree line, dawn was waiting, pale gold seeping across the horizon, banishing the last of the shadows. The light caught them both, turning Sirius's hair to molten silver and catching the green in Remus's eyes until they glowed like new forged bronze, both carved from marble, unworldly beings stepping out of a myth. They looked at one another, and for an instant it seemed impossible that they were men at all. And then Sirius laughed again and Remus joined in, bright as the light spilling between the branches.
Come on.
He said, tugging Sirius forward by the wrist, and side by side they walked into the morning as if the whole world belonged to them. And though the morning air was cool and quiet, it followed them like a whisper. Gods, gods, gods. Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic, composed by Burning Aurora, Caliana, and Flowerhawk.